All right. I think we are live now. Welcome, everyone, to Ask the Experts for Kentico Experience, episode number 8. So glad to have everyone with us today. Actually, I need to mute myself because I'm getting some feedback. There we go. Sounds good. So today we have a very packed-filled audience of our panel and a lot of topics that we're going to be covering today. With us, we have Dimitri Bastron, we have Brian McKeever, Sean Wright, and myself as our Kentico MVPs. Everyone give a wave. And our guest speaker is Liam Goldfinch with Net Construct. He's, of course, a regular both on our Slack channel and also on the Ask the Experts, always coming in. So we thought we'd actually pull him in today and have him as our guest. We love having people in the community with us to join us for the topics today. So without further ado, let's take a look what's on the agenda. So we're going to be talking a little bit about Refresh 3 that came out. I think it was a couple weeks ago it came out for with just a couple features to talk about. Then we're going to dive into talking about node and document custom data. Most of you may not know what that is, but it's actually a tool that's been in Kentico for a while, and we're just kind of now like, hey, let's start leveraging this. So there's a couple aspects to that we're going to be diving into. Then we're going to be talking with Dimitri about merging contacts and some of the issues that he's had and probably you've had with Kentico contacts and duplicates and getting all that data together. Then we're going to be going into form handling and talking about what does that look like going forward? How do you handle different forms and some different tactics? And lastly, we're going to be passing off to Liam to talk about some stuff that's on his mind, as well as just general Kentico developer growth. He may have some other topics as well. We didn't get together right at the last moment, so I hope I put the right topic for him on there. All right. So let's talk about Refresh 3. So first off, in the group here, who is actually updated to Refresh 3 or taking a look at it? Anyone?
We aren't running it in production yet, but we have looked at the feature set. Yeah, I like these features. I feel like they fit right in with the rest of, especially what the page builder does.
Yep. And I've upgraded the baseline to Refresh 3. And for those that aren't aware, of course, we have it up on the screen. There's mainly 3 things that the new Refresh has. So it has widget zone restrictions, widget zone names, and finally allowing multiple page selection. Now that last one's kind of unique because in the code, if you've ever used the page selector, it returns an IEnumerable of pages. It just never had the UI to actually do it. So it's one of those features like we'll get to it, and they finally got around to it to be able to select multiple pages. Anyone care to share good use cases for why we need multiple pages in that selector when you're doing widget and stuff?
Yeah, it was really cool back in Postal Engine days when with some of the controls you can actually select multiple entities to display them and set up them in the right order. So there are a couple of ways how you can tackle this problem without having multiple selection. So originally, when this wasn't possible within the widgets, we have relied heavily on the structured content. So we have prepared our content model, and within the content tab, we have basically had multi-select, where you can select the related pages, order them accordingly, and there we are. Unfortunately for the content editors, it wasn't very great experience because they had to switch between content tab and 2 different items, apply the order, select the right things, and then switch back to the page tab and different item within the tree, and only then would be able to see the actual presentation of it with the right order. Now with the multiple page selection, you can finally select these items being within the same context interface, and that's really helpful. yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, before this, we've been having to use a lot of related pages, so you can have the ordering with the related pages and stuff like that, and then just have the widget pull in that relationship. But we've had some of our clients that also have, like, well, for example, they'll have buttons 1, buttons 2, buttons 3 relationships, because they may appear in different spots and have these groupings, or accordion 1, accordion 2. So we have some clients that have multiple relationships just so they can have groupings, which then kind of defeats it. So now this is nice because you can still have a relationship, but then you can select which items of that or something similar to show in there. So I thought that was great. Same thing with the widget zone restriction is just another level. Like, you could have a widget zone and say you can only use these widgets, but then within a section, so it's actually not widgets, it's the section zone within it, that you can say that I only want these things. So if you have a section that, for instance, is a left-hand side nav and then the main content, you may want to restrict the widgets to only ones that can fit in that smaller frame versus like putting a large text block in a very narrow column, vice versa. Just another way to help our content editors not have to worry about, the nuances of different things.
Yeah, multiple page selection, I felt like, was something we had 4 or 5 ways to get around. And maybe they weren't perfect, but for a lot of situations, they work just fine. The widget zone restrictions, however, is something that you can't really do custom. It needs to be in the platform. And previously, we've spent a lot of time doing content management training to help people understand which widgets belong with which sections. And yeah, you can use you can limit which widgets appear in a editable area, but then you still have that mismatch that you can run into with the sections and the widgets. And to me, this feature really allows you to build out a full suite of components for the page builder, both sections and widgets, and really link them together in a way that's appropriate.
And I'll say that, like, in the example in documentation, that screenshot right here where they have you just hard listening it, what I've found, I'm not sure if you guys agree or not, but actually it's better to use dependency injection and to have a repository that gets the right widgets. That way you don't have a bunch of widget code needs everywhere, because you want to add a widget, now you have to find all the different places that it's used, the other ones, and add it in, versus having a nice like method that you call saying get widgets, maybe you pass it a code name or something like that, and that way it can return the right widgets. So we actually have that for ours, so that way you can actually limit what widgets users can see and use just from like a global admin versus a editor standpoint, kind of like back when we had in Portal Engine days. But that'd be something also that as you're building out your site, you might want to consider, so that way you just don't have a bunch of hard set values everywhere and stuff.
I think at NetConstruct, we quite often use that example there, where we've got an actual widget zone, which we only want. It's only been designed for a Kentico form to be added in there. So it's nice to be able to actually restrict that now, whereas previously we couldn't. We had to basically inform the client or the content editor to say, it's not meant to be for anything else other than the form. So please try and stick to that. But now we can actually kind of enforce that now. So it's nice to have that. I
think all of us have gotten an email like, this looks horrible. Why does it look like this? Like, well, you weren't supposed to put it there to begin with, right? So that's awesome. And then
the funny story I have around Refresh 3 with multiple page selection, to go back a second, that one of the things I think that's important for everyone who's watching to know is that one of the reasons behind refreshes as a whole is to keep adding more value into the product over time, much faster than before. And this is a great example of, I literally had a couple devs on the team here. They were trying to create their own customized widget that kind of worked around not being able to return multiple items in one shot. And they were building it themselves. They were just about done with it at the time that Refresh 3 came out. And I showed them the release notes because they didn't mention this to me. I said, hey guys, we could just do this. And they all kind of face planted with their hands. And they were like, I think the response was, you've got to be kidding me that they just did this, because we were working on this exact thing. And I said, yeah, no, you should have, kind of, I don't know, done a little research first. But either way, it still happened and they were happy. But I think that's it's key for everyone that it's make sure you look at the release notes, make sure you keep up to date with refreshes and where they're going with experience, because this stuff is part of the value of having the subscription license and being on the product, is that you're going to get new tools that it may not sound so exciting when you just read the words widget zone names or widget zone restrictions, but if you're spending time yourself to customize and do this and come up with crazy ways around it, maybe you should at least check first to make sure it's not in the product.
And another point to that, like we are working with Kentico on trying to continue to foster a tighter connection, a tighter loop between the people that are using it and the builders that are building the backend and stuff, to really find out those needs, those frustration points that people find, and get these things in there. And even working with them saying, hey, we built this out, maybe you want to incorporate that into the product and stuff like that. So keep aware that, one, that as a good avenue, if you have good ideas or things that are pain points, tell us about it, and then we can definitely bring it up to Kentico or email Kentico support and get that communication going, because that's the way that the product continually gets better. As well as, if you do create an awesome solution, make sure to get up on the marketplace and get up in a NuGet package, which is getting easier and easier to do, thanks to how quick RCL libraries can be packaged up in a NuGet package, anything that's .NET standard. So those are all cool pieces. Last thing that was on there was the widget zone names, which is to me kind of a no-brainer as well. It's nice that before, if you had a section that had 3 zones and then you moved it to a section that had 4 zones, it just moved the first to first, second to second, third to third, and nothing for the fourth. If you had like 4 to 3, it would take the fourth one and put it into the end of the third. So this way you can actually kind of control that a little more, so that way content will move with those zones. Sadly, I did confirm that they still haven't got it where you could switch templates with the same zone names, but I'm definitely pushing for that you can switch templates and the widgets will stay in the same zone names and stuff. But hopefully this is a step forward to that direction.
Yeah, this would be a really nice, cool addition.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to the next one. So this is a cool thing. So node custom data and document custom data. So Sean, you want to actually take this one off, since it's a little bit more near and dear to you, but you want to explain this one about what these fields are and what's cool about them.
Sure. Yeah. So in Kentico Experience, in various places in the database, there are columns that store XML data. And you'll see a lot of these in e-commerce. So if you're using the e-commerce features, you will see order custom data. And you can store anything you want in there. There's other fields where Experience stores some metadata about an order or a product. But these fields allow us to kind of have a denormalized data structure where we don't have to have a column per field. And this can be really nice when you don't need to, say, join on these fields. And if you do need to do querying, you can use the XML querying to filter out data. But often what you're doing is you're storing some data in these XML columns. And actually, they're varchar columns, but they're storing XML string structures. You can put what you want in there, and then you retrieve that, let's say, a SKU or a page back again, and then you can read the data out of those columns. And the Experience API is set up in a way that it makes it really easy for you to get those values out. And you can see here with my page node custom data get value, and then you pass in the kind of the column name of the XML structure that you want to retrieve the value for, and you can get that value out. Now, similar to how these XML data columns are in the e-commerce area of the platform, they're also included for nodes and documents. So the node custom data is going to be data that is for all cultures of a page. So if you're only doing one culture for your site, then the difference between these probably isn't that significant. But if you have a multi-language site, then your node custom data is going to apply to all cultures of the page, and the document custom data is going to apply to just one culture of a given page. And you can store any of these, you can store any number of values in these database columns, and they will be stored in this structure that you see above, where you have the custom data root element, and then in there is going to be all the additional fields or values you add. and you don't have to share a schema between pages. So that's another really neat thing about this is you could have like a home page that has custom data that looks one way, and then you could have a product page that has custom data looking a completely different way. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that's the best approach to take, but that flexibility is really powerful.
You just have to handle the nulls, right? That's a big thing, is just if you get a null back, that's just what you need to handle.
Yep. So it's up to the developer to accommodate when data might be missing or what the shape of the custom data is for a given page type. Now, if you think about this further, it kind of becomes apparent that the node and document custom data columns can take the role of what custom page type fields normally would be doing. So let's say we have 5 page types in our site, and you want to have something like a is in sitemap column for each of those page types so that you can query all the pages back and build out a sitemap for the site. So you could add a new field for every single one of those pages, but if it's the same field for all the pages, wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to create that field for every single page type, and instead you get to treat that data as being, common to all those pages? You might then want to look at like extending the CMS tree table or the CMS document table, but Kentico experience really advises not doing that because it can cause problems with being compatible with future improvements and updates to the platform. Fortunately, the node custom data and document custom data give us that functionality without needing to extend anything, because these columns are basically infinitely extendable. You can store whatever you want in there. So you could make it so that you store the is in sitemap value in your document custom data, and that will let you build out a sitemap where different cultures of the same page for all pages have a different value of whether or not to include them in the sitemap. This is very powerful, and it extends beyond something like a sitemap. You can include all sorts of metadata or information in these fields that normally you wouldn't be, filtering pages by when you're querying the database, or, often it's just data that you want access to when you get a page, but that's the only time you're really using it.
And keep in mind that you can store JSON and XML in these values too. So if you want a strongly typed object, you just need to serialize and deserialize as well. However, of course, there's one issue to this, or two issues. One is, how do you get data in there? And two, what about like staging and pushing this data across and the workflow features? So that leads us into this. Sean, this is your baby, which I love. So go and take away this and what we do with this and what the problem was and how you solved it.
I'm glad you love my baby, Trevor. Usually people only love their own babies, but right. So when I first kind of discovered these columns, I had a feeling for what we might be able to do with them. But like Trevor mentioned, I didn't know how to get the data into the columns. So what we initially did for some of our projects was we did create those page type fields across all the page types we needed, usually using a base page type. So we'd have a is in sitemap field for all our different public page types that might appear in a sitemap. And then using global events, we would, anytime that a page was created or updated, we would take that value from the page type field and then shove it into the custom data column for the document. The whole reason we would do that is because it made querying for whether or not a page is in the sitemap a lot easier. Yes, it requires XML SQL syntax, but it's really not that painful. There's a lot of documentation around that. And that meant we didn't have to union together, 25 page type tables in order to determine which pages were going to appear in the sitemap. We could query just one table and just one column to get that data set that we wanted. Of course, there's some ergonomic aspects with that we didn't really like, and that's having to create a additional column on every single page type that we ended up really not using because the data was then being always copied over to the document custom data column. Then I realized that we might be able to kind of like hack around this. And the first thing I did was I created some custom form controls, and these are the Portal Engine UI controls that build out a form for the content tab of a page type. And I thought, okay, I'll build out a custom checkbox. And this custom checkbox will store the data in the custom data column as opposed to the page type field. Of course, then if I want to do a whole bunch of different custom data fields, I need to build out a custom form control for every single type of control that I would want to use. And that obviously is not scalable. So I use this technology that's been in the platform for a long time called control extenders. And control extenders are basically like a decoration pattern where you let's say you have a class and you wrap it in an interface or another class that has the exact same shape that kind of lets you intercept data going into and out of that inner class. And this control extender does the same thing. It lets you wrap any control and lets you intercept the data or the value being put into the control to populate the UI, or when someone interacts with the control and saves the form, it lets you read the data before that value is handed off to the database. And so using a control extender, we can create a clone of any form control in the platform, not have to write any custom code, and basically intercept the value going into that form control and coming out of it. And when we do that interception, that gives us a hook point to save that value to the custom data column. So here you can see it's a couple steps to go in and create a cloned version of say a dropdown, and then the control extender you select is the page custom data control extender. And now you can use that kind of custom form control anywhere you would be creating page type fields. So this is a really powerful feature. Only a few clicks in the UI, and all of a sudden you've kind of extended how you can use this control for your page types. There's a second part of this, and that's we don't actually want to store the value in a page type field, right? That was kind of the problem, is we're creating all these additional page type fields that aren't actually being used when the application is running. So what we do is we create a non-database field on our page type. And normally these aren't super useful, because if something's not being persisted, when you leave a page and then come back to it and go to fill out information again, whatever you did with that form control that is not persisting data into the database, it's not sticking around. So it's not doing you any favors. However, with this, by using the field without the database representation and using the custom data form control, we can push the data that the form control is creating, the value, into the custom data column that is coming from the field name at the top, and then read the data out of there as well. So this lets us kind of redirect all the values that we'd be putting into this page type content tab into the custom data columns and reading it back out. And we can do this for as many fields as we want, and for whatever types of controls that we want. And Kentico Experience has a giant set of form controls that have been built up over the years. So this gives us all the power of those form controls and lets us store and work with our data in a new dimension that kind of hasn't been available to us before. So yeah, I find this to be really powerful. We're using it for all sorts of different kinds of fields and values, and it kind of turns your the data management mindset into more of a NoSQL or a document data structure instead of your traditional normalized relational data.
Awesome. So, and like I said, it's just that easy. So that is awesome sauce. And also his extender. Now, Tron, which one was it again? It was the node custom data didn't stage, or the document custom data that didn't stage. One of them did, one didn't.
Right. So this is something I ran into, and this is one of those situations where I'm testing something and saving, and nothing's changing, and I'm like, is my code broken? What's going on? It turns out that the node custom data column is versioned with a page under workflow. The document custom data column is not. I'm sure there was a technical design decision for that initially years ago, it was something that was not apparent to me. You can override or customize the providers in Kentico Experience, and it's a kind of like 3-line change where you provide a custom provider that says, yes, I actually do want you to version and store under workflow the document custom data column. And that way, anything that you store using this control extender in document custom data will behave just like all the other page type fields that are automatically getting versioned under workflow.
And that's included with this NuGet package as well. So if you get this NuGet package, it automatically does that for you. Same thing I used to do with the custom data field to make it where your custom module classes could be staged. It's just one override that says, yeah, I actually do want to stage this, so go ahead. So definitely recommend you to check that out. And just to show you again the power of that. So this is, I want to show you another thing that I did. Now, this particular case, I did not use Sean's tool but I used the custom data field, and that is extending the metadata. So as you know, Kentico has a page title description and keywords metadata for that you can use to build out your SEO. One thing it's missing though is the OG tag. Like, it's pretty basic part of any sharing of links is to have that image. So what I did is, and there's 2 ways of doing this, is I added an OG image that is based on the custom data field. Now you can do what Sean has, where you have a base page type, and then you add a image without page representation, set the image there, and use that. I wanted it on this screen because it's in one spot. So what I actually end up doing is I actually modified the metadata controller.cs file. So this is what actually does the metadata page, and I added to the CMS document alternative form for the metadata. I added that field without database representation, just set it to a normal media selector. And then in the code, I had to put 3 lines to be able to retrieve that value and set that value because it was done through this extender. But doing that, I was able to now make it where in the metadata, I have my OG image tag. So, and that's in that custom data. And then when I bring that up in the actual code itself, so here's my page metadata view component that will get my page metadata. And I'm not passing it a thumbnail. So by default, it grabs the current page using the page retriever, whichever one you're on. It grabs the columns of the custom data, which we need for the meta field, the page title, description, and keywords. And then it will build out the and document name, I should say, is also in there, I believe. If not, I need to add it. Might need to add that. And then it will take the metadata and use the title of the page title, document name, the keywords, and then the thumbnails. If I don't pass it one, it just uses the node.get custom data, .get value, document OG image, and handles null in case it is a null. So now on my pages, as long as I set that, it will render out my meta, including the OG tag. And that's part of the new baseline update for refresh 3. So that code is in there. So, you know, it has update instructions, but that's awesome because that was one thing that was very much missing in the SEO realm, is to get that OG tag in there.
Trev, I'm going to call you out right there because
Yeah.
I heard you modified the CMS code.
Yes, I did. Because
I'm
the
not going
admin
to say
that I can get behind
that. Here's one thing.
Yep,
I think it's a good approach, but the cool thing about experience is there's many ways to do things, right? What we would typically do is take the metadata system fields and show them on the content tab. So you're staying in one place with all the rest of the fields. You get it away from the need to do any modification to that metadata property tab that you were in. Get them over there, get them by the other fields. Then I'm with you on all the other things you did. But
I'll take it. This one, I'm like, you know what?
Cannot recommend changing.
13 is the last one with the .NET Core admin. I'm gonna have to redo it when you get to Odyssey. So I'm like, I'm okay with this one.
I know,
but
a hotfix should come along. It could overwrite that file. You're gonna have to deal with it. I just shuddered from all the years of dealing upgrades.
And that is a good point. So when in general, and usually I'm more anal about like cloning it off and making my own copy or whatnot. In this case, whenever you're working in Kentico in the admin, it's always best to clone it and do your own thing separate so it doesn't get overrun by an upgrade or hotfix. This one I wasn't too concerned about because of those specific reasons. But a better way would have been to maybe create our own UI that is our own metadata, maybe hide the existing one or something. That way you had that in one spot. I just wanted to see what it would take to get it in there. So yes, I'm a bad boy for that one, so I'll take that.
I like that a lot of the decisions around the way you approach this are based on two factors. One is the development experience. And so this control extender was really driven in part by my developer experience. I didn't want to create a brand new form control and change the code for every single one to push data into the node or document custom data columns. It was also driven by the content management experience. So for the content managers that work on the sites that we build, we find that having all the information in the content tab, like Brian mentioned, is very helpful. Having to remember which of the additional tabs and under the properties, that third tab in this screenshot, remembering where a field is under those can sometimes be a little overwhelming, especially if you maybe haven't been in the site for a while. You have to remember which thing to click on, and you're clicking through 5 different tabs to try and find, it's that one. So yeah, I sometimes feel like putting stuff in the content tab. I'm thinking as a content manager, what would I like? Having everything all in that screen and being able to scroll down and check all the data or edit it in one place can be really nice.
And keep in mind that, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
I was saying that, and keep in mind that you can put macros in this metadata area. So what we've done for some clients is we'll have like the page title, the abstract, which is the description, and then we put this image, which can be stored again in the custom data. And then in the metadata area, you can put macros that will pull that in automatically if you wish. So that those other ways you can kind of massage around it. But I do like also having it in one spot. In this case, I just put it in the metadata since most people are kind of used to going there for that. But you can, like I said, pull from any field you want. And with this new tool that Sean created, you could have all that data in the custom data field if you want. You don't even have to use Kentico's document title, document description, and tag names and stuff like that. You could have it just everything in that custom data, and then in your metadata repository, pulling from those fields instead.
Yeah, so I think I'm with you guys. I like the benefits, but I'm not 100% on this is an amazing thing because I worry about search. You have that stuff buried in those fields, and yes, the sitemap example, fantastic, right? We've also done custom data for like e-commerce things, like Sean you mentioned, and like line item tax. We need a tax per line item. Perfect place for it. But I'd be careful on anything presentation layer that is included in searching, because I don't think that that's going to be searchable by default unless you do, again, a custom solution to bring that across.
Yeah, that's a great point. You could potentially have every single page type field in your document custom data.
Yep.
I don't advise it, but it's possible.
Yeah.
That's a great point. You only want to put things in there where it makes sense. Like where storing all the OG image, you're not going to be searching on that, right? You're not going to be filtering on that. Yep. However, even if you were, you can use XML SQL querying to pull out or to retrieve records that match a certain criteria. So it is possible, but it's not the best experience. And we try to reserve using this technique for things where we need data centralized in one column, or it truly is metadata about the page.
Exactly.
And I can get behind that, but it's not going to show up in the search fields UI for configuring an index. So just again with Kentico experience, there's 17 different ways to do all the things, and this is a great tool to add in for those behind the scene fields. And I love it because that's a great use case. But just make sure everyone doesn't take this as a message of saying, here's how to do best practice for everything in the world.
Everything's gonna be situational. Speaking of use cases, Sean has another kind of a child element of this one that goes and brings back the navigation feature. So a lot of us remember that if you had a page that, you had the navigation, you could say this page should redirect to its child or redirect to this URL or whatever. That went away, but now that we have the document custom data, he made this little tool here to be able to then reinstate that.
Yep. So this uses that control extender, and it really just sets up a pattern for creating the fields on the page type that give you options of how you would like to a page to behave when it's navigated to. This, like Trevor mentioned, this mimics the portal engine functionality where you could change how the interacting with the page through a HTTP request would behave, namely redirecting from the page to somewhere else. So this gives you multiple options. You can have an external URL that you want to redirect to. So you could if someone visits a certain page, you could redirect them to google.com. It has internal, so you can select a page tree node and have it redirect there. And that way, if you move that page around, the redirect doesn't break, right? It's always going to just redirect to that page. And then you can also select first child, which is nice if you have kind of a container page that does have a URL, but you don't really want people navigating there. You can have it automatically redirect to the first child. And so that's like the content management half. And then there's the code customization half, which runs in the ASP.NET Core application, which adds a resource filter and checks each time a page is requested. Is there a data context for that? And if there is, it pulls out those custom data fields and then does the correct redirect based on what those fields are. Currently have this in a beta pre-release NuGet package. You can try it out if you want. I'm just kind of trying it out myself and making sure there's no corner cases I'm running into. But I found it to be really powerful, and it's great to be able to have that functionality and work with it in a way that matches the way Portal Engine did, and not have to have a whole bunch of custom hard-coded redirects in your ASP.NET Core application to give this similar functionality that we used to have.
Exactly. All right, so I think we should move on because we're definitely getting up there in time, and we still got a lot to cover. So I'm going to move on to Dimitri. He wants to talk about merging context and what he's had. Now, Dimitri, do you have your screen share that I can add to the stream again?
Yeah, just bear with me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so hopefully you should be able to share it now.
And let's see if I can make. No, oh, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get. No, I want to meet. Okay, I'm just going back to what we had before. There we go. Sorry about that. All right, go ahead and take it away, Dimitri.
Yeah, can you see the presentation? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the one particular issue where you may have faced previously, but you may be hearing about this for the first time, because this is this is one of the issues you're not facing very common. Okay, so what's the problem? Contact merging with users merging, all this sort of stuff. Okay, so you may be wondering, when I open the contact management application and open the details about your contact, okay, so there's an email address. That's perfectly fine. But if you click on the users tab, sometimes in some edge cases, you may see that actually your contact is mapped to multiple users, which have different email addresses, and you will start thinking like, what's going on? Why is this happening? And I've seen quite a few questions during the last couple of years on the DevNet. Devs were wondering what's happening, why I'm seeing this behavior, and actually, is this a problem? Well, yes, because when you're dealing with within your code, if you're calling out the current contact from contact management context and checking the contact email, and if you have users on your website, there's another way to check the email. Like for authenticated user, there is an email field, and in this particular instance, they wouldn't match. So it means that when you're dealing with something, you don't actually know what's the correct email address of the individual who is browsing your website. And that causes a few difficult issues. For example, marketing automation can't be reliably used because marketing automation constantly runs against the contacts, not against the users. then this is the most important thing, because when you fill a form, use the consent field from the data protection module. Consent given might not be stored against, may be stored against the wrong email address. And finally, personalization, activity tracking, etc., may not be working correctly. Okay, so why you might not be seeing this issue before? Simply because in order to face this issue, your website needs to meet a certain criteria. So first of all, your website requires a login, and then multiple users from your user audience should share the same computer device and log in with different users to see this. From my experience, I would say that we have seen similar behavior in multiple business cases. So for example, it's B2B sector. Imagine if you are providing some goods for small businesses, there will be small business users, obviously, who are dealing with your website. They probably try to purchase something, like user A can log into the website, purchase something, and in the same time, if that's a really small business, they might not be providing like computers or laptops for every single individual, so they might be sharing the same machines. So the other option would be family users. If your website provides some services where family members will be expected to log in and make some actions on the website, then universities and schools with the public computers, like public hall computers or library computers, etc. And finally, public sector, where again, shared computers sometimes isn't great, but still common practice.
And we actually, I'll say, we've ran into this with the school university thing with one of our sites where the logins and the emails were mismatching, and they're in that same situation. So it does happen, especially in that realm.
Yeah. Okay. So let's try and trace how it happens. So imagine that you are running the Kentico Experience website, and there is a shared computer, and Alice starts interacting with this computer. Okay, so she first visits your website, and she is browsing obviously as anonymous contact. Then there's a current contact cookie dropped onto the computer, and then imagine if Alice logs in. If you have looked at the implementation of the login within one of the test websites, like Dancing God, for example, there's one method called during the login process. I will show you this a bit later, which apparently gets your contact known. So now it is a known contact, Alice, and then she disappears from the computer, and Bob takes over. So Bob's starting browsing your website. Again, on the first visit, it's Bob, but as cookies are kept on the browser, he is still recognized as a known contact. And then Bob logs in. I think at this point in time, most of the developers and most of the CMS users would probably expect that upon login, the Bob will be recognized as known contact, but as a different contact. However, by default, it's not true, and this is where this exact behavior happens. Upon login, Kentico will not merge. The contact will still be one contact, Alice, but it will assign both users to this contact. And then the worst thing that could happen on your website, if Bob fills out the form and gives, for example, a marketing consent, subscribes to a newsletter or something like this, he might be expecting a few emails coming his way shortly. Unfortunately, all these emails will be reaching out to Alice.
And Dimitri, can I add in here that, like, I think it's important that when we say Kentico won't know, it can't know on itself, because you're developing the live site and you're the one writing the code that handles login. Like, Kentico doesn't provide a login web part anymore in MVC and in Experience 13. So it's the code that you're taking, and if you take the default sample code, as you mentioned, it doesn't have the smartness built into it, because that's not a part of the scenario of what the default examples are trying to get across. They're just trying to get you started. So it's crucial that you're going through this, that developers know it's on their responsibility to make the live site code handle this the right way. So I just want, like, Kentico can know if you know to do it. That's the key thing I'm taking out of this so far.
Yeah, absolutely agree. That's the right message, and I think we should be doubling on this. That bear in mind that Dancing Goat is not the best practice example you should be following when you are creating your websites. Dancing Goat is a demo site showing you features from CMS and how they can be used. However, it's not always the case how you should be using this. Okay, so let's dive into the code for a moment. So if you look again at Dancing Code example, there is an account controller and login method where within this processing of your login, there's one method called from contact management context update user login contact, where you pass the username who is currently logging in. So what it does under the hood, there is a default implementation of iCurrent contact provider interface within Kentico, which calls the get current contact method for specified user upon login. So there's important parameter false user matching, which is set to true during login in particular. And then when it is applied, then the following call is happening. Aside from iCurrent contact provider, there's iCurrent user contact provider, which retrieves the right contact based on the current user and current contact information available to you. I think it's important to mention that these are the providers which are customizable and as a developer, it would be your responsibility to write some logic to customize this to your desired behavior. And what we did on most of our websites, we have customized this behavior to check whether if current user and current contact emails are not matching, that for the current user email, we try to fetch the right contact, and if it's not possible, we just retrieve the default anonymous contact for this user. I think it's worth mentioning that depending on your requirements, you may end up customizing something like you can drop the contact to anonymous one upon logout, for example, which will mean that when user on your website logs out, we forget about the current known contact history and history of interactions, and can start fresh within the next few clicks when user browsing the page. Okay, with this particular example, let's see how imagine if we have customized the code for iCurrent user contact provider. The first part stays the same, and Bob starts browsing from the same computer. He first visits the website. He will still be recognized for the time being as Alice. And then upon login, this particular piece of code it gets executed, and in the return, Bob gets different cookie value. So it will be Bob contact associated with Bob's user. And then when Bob fills out the form and gives marketing consent, then Bob will be receiving these emails and everything will be fine. Then I think it might be worth mentioning some other useful customizations you may find useful when you're writing the code to support these scenarios. So first of all, it would be current contact provider. This code gets executed on every single request which reaches your website. This is where Kentico marketing context tries to retrieve the current context contact for the code you can execute, and this is the point where you can customize this behavior. So if we set aside the example I'm currently browsing, this is where it can be used for multiple options. For example, if you are trying to use Kentico experience in a headless manner and behind some other solution, this is where you can customize the tracking and, for example, switch from current contact cookie to another solution, basically to whatever you want. Then the other customization point is current user contact provider. Mainly, it has two methods, and the main purpose of those is when you have current user and current contact, you need to return back the correct context contact. And this is where this piece of code gets executed upon login if you try to match users and contacts during the login. Then another useful interface you can use and customize is contact creator. By initializing this within Kentico, you can create a new anonymous contact if you need one, and then contact relation assigner, which will help you matching contacts and users together. And finally, contact persistent storage. I think this is one of the important interfaces. By using this, you can overwrite the current contact who is browsing the website. For example, during logout, you can call a method of set a new anonymous contact, and basically job's done. The anonymous contact will be assigned instead of the current contact browser in your website.
Awesome. Hey, do you have code samples with a link to GitHub for these modifications you made?
Yeah, I'm going to share this probably in the next couple of weeks. So
all right. So if you can put a link to your GitHub, that'd be awesome.
Does this require you to change the code that's in your login method of your controller, or do you mostly spend your time customizing these the implementations for these interfaces?
No, the code within the login method stays the same. So it's just a matter of let me just jump back. Okay, so the code, if you put this line of code within your login method, it tries to match the user and contact. So it instructs Kentico to give an attempt to match. And then all other customizations are done within these interfaces. So
okay,
sounds good. All right, so go ahead and paste your GitHub link. Brian has a time limit, so I'm going to actually move on to the next one. But
I do want to. So my other point that's a benefit of what you've got, Dimitri, is for testing. We have a lot of our marketing teams that run into this issue when they're trying to test a scenario that we develop marketing automation for them. They want to run through it as Alice or Bob or Jane or someone, but yet they've already been to the site. They already have a contact, and we try to tell them, "Oh, use a different browser." Well, they've already done a test scenario in the other browser that they have. So, have you ever tried to walk a non-technical person through how to clear their cookies in a browser? It's like it's like the worst thing ever, right? You're banging your head on the wall as a developer thinking, please click here, please click here. Nothing, it's not anyone's fault. It's just not something a normal person thinks to do or knows how to do. So if you have this figured out the right way, I think it would help all out with testing the scenario for making sure marker animation is running the right way.
Yeah, absolutely, because we've seen these kind of the same weird behaviors where the marketing automation process kicks in, but for the wrong person.
Yep. Okay.
All right. I know we're running low on time, so Brian, you want to take it away for form handling?
Sure. So, again, time is a constraint today. We're going to move fast. I really was going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that are optional, different variations of way to handle creating a form on a Kentico Experience MVC site using some of the new technologies. But I'm gonna skip the majority of that based off time and get to the point I really want to hammer home, which is there is a surprise in the migration and upgrade cycles, especially if you're coming from Portal Engine. We're used to having an upgrade that goes from 10 to 11 to 12. It brings across everything. It brings the page types, the content, the forms, and the form data. It's usually not an issue. Well, this year, as we've been doing more and more upgrades to Kentico Experience 13 and the removal of Portal Engine, there's a little hidden gem in the upgrade release notes that says, and actually, Trav, can I share my screen? Then I won't have to completely read everything. We're going to try this.
Share your screen. I'll add it in there.
And I'm hoping at this point, let me know when you can see the upgrade notes.
Go ahead and share the screen so I can see it in the my tray. It's not showing up yet. So do you share it?
Not showing up yet. Oh, you know what? If you click the screen that you want to share, that generally helps.
There we go.
How about now?
There we go.
Okay. So right here, we're not all the way down in the notes, but it's kind of, if you look for form, click on the right browser. If you look for form, it's in there a lot, but the upgrade is not possible if the project contains obsolete forms. This threw us off at the beginning of the last quarter when we were doing a lot of our upgrade work. And we're like, well, what do you mean we can't upgrade the forms? And it actually says that forms created in Kentico version 11 or older, mainly on the Portal Engine, just aren't really compatible with Kentico Experience 13. So it says that you need to go back up and record any form data and remove the forms. Well, that's not exactly a great statement to make to people who have maybe 50 forms on their Kentico instance because they've used it for a while. And yes, you actually do have to do this. You have to create a backup, then you have to go delete this to make sure that the form wizard does continue through this upgrade process. But then what do you do, right? Now you have a brand new Kentico 13 upgraded freshly site, and you have no forms in it. And that's not going to work in a real world scenario. So what the recommendation here is that, you can create new forms using the new form builder. Well, cool, but that's a lot of work, right? If you have 50 forms that have a lot of fields, and that's a lot of busy work. It doesn't really add any value because you actually had all that defined. Unfortunately, there's no perfect solution to this. There's nothing that just automatically works just great. There's one small shortcut that we have found that I can share with everyone is that you can actually import the forms from 12 to 13. It will complain. It'll throw a warning. And it will say, hey, this is not exactly compatible. But at least then you can get the form and the data into the 13 instance. And what you can do is in your MVC code base, you could at least call out to the form definition of a form and iterate through the fields that are in the form definition to render a form on the screen, right? It still is using an MVC approach, but it's a hybrid and a stopgap that would allow you then to work on maybe creating one or two new forms in Form Builder to get used to it. And it's kind of a nice little migration path of still supporting an old situation. And this has happened to us a couple times now where I'm talking literally more than 50 fields or 50 forms that all had 10 to 20 fields on it. And there's no way that I'm going to go back to a customer and say, oh, start re-entering all your forms from scratch. So
we're going to be facing that same thing then as well. And I know that you're up against a tight end, but one thing that we've been working as well, and I hear from Sean that you do the same thing, is is that whole piece where you're starting to render forms using the metadata from Kentico, but not even using the form widget, and instead doing custom rendering of it, right?
Mhm.
Now, do you use TypeScript, Vue, or just basic MVC? What do you use for your rendering?
I mean, we still try to stay a little bit with general with Razor because we're in the .NET Core world. It's fairly easy to crank out an MVC-based form with Razor. We are doing some stuff with React still and having React read the... I mean, basically, you're going to get schema back that defines the metadata of a form, and it'll have the caption, the type, is it required? It'll have all that in there. You just need to inspect it and deal with it. And you can actually, in a way, even instantiate the Kentico field and form objects with that and still have it in a structured way. So,
and I think we'll probably
there's
need
ways to do it.
I think at some point we'll need to create a migration script. I love that you can do the export and import. There's got to be a way that we could probably write up some way to take the old schema and then map it at least to the basic format of the fields and stuff like that. So that'd be something that we might want to take a look into. When you do have the schema data, though, because I've been working on this as well, is how to do React-based rendering of your forms, especially working in like the admin, where right now if you build a customization in the Kentico admin, it's going to be gone commodity. You're going to have to rebuild it. So keeping as much of that agnostic. So I have a sample that I've been working on of actually taking a form configuration that has the name, the label, default values, all the stuff that's in the schema data itself, and then using that to then actually render out a form in React. And that way, when you have your validation, if I try to submit it, we still have validation in there. You have custom rules, and ultimately when it submits, it will return to your function a strongly typed object. So we'd have to find a way to make that strongly typed object from the form data, so it has the model, and then maybe even make an endpoint. So this is something that we are working on as well internally. I think, Brian, you've done a lot of this type of back-end work with your implementation using MVC to read the data, build it out, be able to put it on there, submit it, and get it posted and stuff. So I did not know that it would not allow you to upgrade at all, though. So that is a shock, because we do have some customers that have a lot of forms and alternative forms. And that's another piece. There's no alternative forms as of yet in 13. So that's where this is kind of nice, because then you can make an alternative rendering of a form that's still the same form data and stuff like that. Right. So these are huge things.
I mean, it sounds like we could do an entire Ask the Experts show on just forms and different ways to handle forms. But honestly, I think we should probably move on and give Liam his time to talk about his topic, because I'm interested to hear what he's got to say.
All right, so we'll move on. And then I think we will have to take that as a next step. But reach out if you have the same issue and you want some code samples. I'm still working on getting my stuff formalized, and that'll get up on the GitHub and stuff. But let's go ahead, and I'm going to pass it off to Liam. Liam, you've been so patient. I'm sorry that it took a bit to get to you. I'm going to go ahead and add his awesome PowerPoint, and
thank you.
Take it away.
It's won't be a second. So my talk is just about growing as a Kentico experience developer. So I guess we'll start off with who actually am I. So my name is Liam Goldfinch, Senior Systems Developer for NetConstruct. They're a digital web agency based in Leeds, United Kingdom, but we've got offices dotted around. So I joined them about 8 years ago. I think maybe 8 and a quarter or something now. It's starting to stack up the years now. But I joined right at the beginning, straight out of university, so I didn't have any experience about what a CMS was. I didn't know how websites really functioned at that point in time. So I've really gone from knowing nearly nothing in CMS like terminology to 8 years down the line knowing quite a bit about Kentico Experience and other platforms like I've put there. We use Umbraco, and we use various headless CMSs as well, like Content, things like that as well. So back 8 years ago, I started on the help desk team. It was probably Kentico 5.5 R2 back then, I think. And a good way of starting to learn Kentico Experience at the time was being on the help desk team. So I was looking at websites that other developers in the company had already built, get to see how they built widgets and web parts, and got a feel for what Kentico was at that point in time. And it was good to communicate with other members of the team. So since then, obviously, I've moved on to being a developer. I've become a senior systems developer. I've started leading projects within NetConstruct and helping new members of the team, get them trained up, and so that they're comfortable using Kentico Experience. So the resources that I typically give to new starters when they join the company, firstly, I often recommend that they look at the tutorials part of the documentation. So there's a nice area on there where it tells you about page types and what Kentico actually is, and how to build up navigations and actually like configure the platform. It's a really good starting point for a new developer for Kentico Experience. And then to build up from that, I also, NetConstruct, we really like to get our new developers onto the Kentico Experience official training. So we do recommend that everybody does the Portal Engine training, even though we don't actively build new Portal Engine websites, just because we still have old clients that still use Portal Engine. So it's still really good for our development team to know Portal Engine, even if we're not going to push down that avenue, if that makes sense. We also use the MVC and .NET Core official training as well. So I think the good thing about the official training, it does actually have like links about MVC 5 and .NET Core. So if you haven't actually used these new technologies yet, it does actually link off to other platforms and stuff to actually help you along that process. So I think that the MVC training is in like 3 different modules. There's the Essentials, which tells you about Kentico Experience APIs, how to do caching and different design patterns that Kentico recommend you use. It also goes on to the page builders and widgets and sections and how to use page templates within Kentico. And I think there's another module, which is identity, which I haven't actually looked at yet. And I think that's all to do with authentication. I don't know of any of the MVPs. Have you looked at this module yet? I'd like to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, that's really useful. So the authentication methods, if you prior dealing with Kentico 12 or 13, if you only done Portal Engine websites, the authentication is very different on .NET Core. So definitely worth having a look and going through this module, because you will learn lots of new things.
Cool. So is that mainly for Kentico Experience authentication, or does it talk about like authenticating externally and stuff like that, or is it just authentication against Kentico Experience, like a single sign-ons and stuff like that? Or does it not do any kind of that?
I can't remember from the top of my head if it's covering the single sign-on aspects, but probably with .NET Core, it's relatively straightforward. It's just a matter of assigning the right authentication provider, and it just works. So it doesn't require any additional code.
Yeah, I think that's one module I definitely want to have a quick look over, just to see what Kentico do recommend in there and see what the recommended approaches are. So after the tutorials and training, the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is just the documentation in general. It's just a really useful thing to actually go on there. Pretty much over the 8 years I've been at NetConstruct, I don't think there's been a day that I haven't really looked at the documentation, because you're always looking at different things and refreshing your mind. There's so many things in Kentico Experience that you obviously do need to keep refreshing yourself about what things are in there and how to achieve things. And I don't know why it's pink, but API examples is a part of the website, actually, I think that a lot of new starters tend to miss. So I don't know if I can click the link on. Yeah, is it going to open? So I think like when people visit the documentation, they don't necessarily know that you can click on this drop down here, and there's API examples, so you can actually see examples of, I don't know, content management. You might want to look at the custom table data. You might want to see how to retrieve data from a custom table, how to add new records. And it's amazing how many people that start a NetConstruct and they just don't know that this drop down's a thing. I think it needs to be a bit more highlighted in some way, I guess. I'm not sure, but.
Plus workflows, like whenever, even as experienced as I am, like whenever I need to do page with workflowing and make sure all that, I always go back to the API to make sure you get like the proper check-ins, checkouts, grab the workflow, all those pieces to it. And so I go there all the time as well, and I'm an MVP.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to go to the next page. So I think we've already mentioned like the sample websites that you can get as well. So it's obviously there's the Dancing Goat website, which is quite useful. Again, like we said earlier, it doesn't have the best practices, but it shows you how to use some of the features of Kentico. So I do still reference it every so often just to see what things have been done in there. But the key thing I like to have Dancing Goat installed on my computer for is testing refreshers, using it as a test playground to, I don't know, when there's blog posts about implementing things in different ways, I like to go on Dancing Goat and actually just test around with that. I don't want to do it on an actual real client's website. I'd much prefer doing it on a Dancing Goat instance. And you can just use it as effectively like a throwaway website. So it's really good to use that.
It's also worth mentioning that Dancing Goat website is typically much lighter than your current website you're working on would be. So it runs faster. You can just open it, fire a couple of lines of code, check your theory, and then close it off.
Yeah. I think like if you contact Kentico support, quite often they'll ask you to test it on Dancing Goat as well. So it's obviously quite useful to have it installed on your machine, ready to go at that point in time. So the other thing I'd like to mention as a shout out to Trev for his sample website for the Kentico 13 Experience baseline. It's available on GitHub. There's the link there. I use it. I don't necessarily use it for creating brand new websites for Kentico Experience, but I do look for it on GitHub for a good reference point for seeing how Dev Trev and how Heartland have approached building different things in Kentico Experience, because with him being an MVP, obviously it's going to be a good way of approaching things. So it's nice to see what other companies how are approaching different things in Kentico Experience and compared to what I'm currently doing. So it's always a good thing to check on there. So resources for all experienced developers in general, not just new developers. I think one of the biggest resources that we've got is the Kentico Experience MVPs. The amount of blog posts that are getting pushed through Twitter and LinkedIn from, well, all the MVPs, it's just really good resource. And I like just clicking on them, seeing what they're all about. You get to learn about all the new different things that have been introduced into Kentico Experience, or even like what we discussed today, there's features that have been there in the past that have come back, and it's just highlighting how you can use these features that are in Kentico Experience that you might not necessarily just use. And I think it's good to get a follow on Twitter and on LinkedIn and follow all the MVPs. Really, I think that's a good way of getting.
And I'll put in, if you're not part of the Kentico Experience community Slack channel, send one of us an email, and we'll add you. We're still trying to find the true admin that we can open it up where you don't need to have us add you. But in essence, though, I mean, we're here for you. So I can't tell you how many times we've had people, Liam and other people, send me private messages on Slack saying, hey, I'm running this issue. You know, I've been known to spin up WebExes and, Teams meetings just to take a look and help someone through. So we are servants of the community. So yeah, just want to throw out there that don't think that we're some lofty people that, you have to go through, the bosses at the gates to get to or whatever. We're here for you.
Yeah, one example of that is I think it was about a year and a half or 2 years ago when we used to use your routing for Kentico 12 MVC. There was a few issues with like workflows and stuff like that we worked together and we resolved things like that. So that was quite useful to have access to you as well. So so the next thing obviously is Ask the Experts. Everyone's obviously watching it anyway, so I don't really need to give it too much of a shout. But I did want to include it in there because it's a nice, useful thing to watch. For me, especially at the end of the day, because it's at the end of the working day now. So typically when I watch this, it's quite a nice thing to end the working day on and get to communicate with the MVPs and find out what's going on within the community. So I want to shout out to DevNet as well. It's a good place to put questions and answers. I think the chances are, if you've got a question about Kentico Experience, if you Google it, it probably will bring up an article on DevNet that somebody's asked the question already. So quite often I get people linking articles on DevNet, and you just get brilliant answers from MVPs or just community members that are just willing to help, or even the Kentico support team on there as well. So if there isn't already a question on there, you can always go on there and submit your question, and hopefully someone that day will reply to you and give you a good response. Stack Overflow kind of overlaps with DevNet, I think, but I feel like it doesn't get used as much as DevNet does. Maybe because DevNet exists, Stack Overflow doesn't get as much love, maybe.
And that's actually a question I want to ask you, because we use Stack Overflow for everything developmental wise. You need to quickly get a code sample, you forgot what the syntax is, you look up on Stack Overflow. And there is an integration where if you post it on Stack Overflow and you hashtag, I think it's just Kentico, or maybe now it's experience, it pulls it in. But that's a discussion point. Like, I've seen less activity on the DevNet, and just because a lot of people are now on the Slack channel, I see a lot of Slack stuff. I'm not sure if that's the case, or I'm not looking there a lot. So what are your feelings on, should, and maybe it's a question for once you get through all your things, which of these do you usually get help from the most? Which has been the most helpful and stuff? But
I think for me, it's probably the DevNet's the main one that I always go to. And that's the bit that I check almost every day to see what's going on, see what new questions are going in, because it's always better to ask questions. And it's nice to have it publicly visible. Whereas like in Slack, that will get lost in the history kind of thing. It's eventually, if you wanted to go back in time and see what other people have answered, I think it's harder to find questions in Slack. Whereas in DevNet, it's all there, and it's obviously searchable via Google as well, or over search engines. So I do think DevNet has its kind of place over Slack, but I've got Slack on here as well. So Slack community, I feel like that's more, it's better for casual decisions, discussions, should I say. A bit more informal maybe, and a bit more chat about, I don't know, like design patterns, or if you've got a problem with Kentico and how the new features are used. I think it's better for more real-time discussions, I think, whereas DevNet, I think, is a better place for, I don't know, just better questions in general, I guess.
Yeah.
I think ideally, we would all create questions on DevNet and then post the links to them in Slack with a quick summary and say, hey, can anyone help me out with this? And that way it would keep the conversation public and searchable. It's really easy in Slack to just have like you said, like a discussion about it and get a bunch of people involved in real time. And that does facilitate solutions faster and conversations that maybe we couldn't have if we were doing it in the Q&A format on DevNet. But it does have the drawback of, if someone did have a great idea or a solution to a problem, there's no finding that again after a month or two. It's gone.
I think that's the main thing for me, is having the history kind of always there. And I think that's where DevNet kind of is a bit better in keeping that in that regard. So
what's interesting with DevNet is that so you can ask the question. However, DevNet can also be used as a kind of educational platform. So a few years ago, I found myself, so I want to learn more about the platform. So I started monitoring through the questions, and so what are the problems or interesting tasks developers are dealing with? So refresh the page, open few recent questions, and first of all try to think, how would you handle this? How would you have solved this prior reading the answer? So it triggers you to read like a certain part of the documentation, maybe try and search the answer, and that's how I started learning the platform and found this actually the most effective way, rather than just reading through the documentation, because it will be just endless.
I remember when I was starting my journey to become an MVP, it was almost a competition, because that was like the main way to kind of like show your points and how much of an expert you were, was DevNet. And so like we had the DevNet on the RSS feed, and I had it where like as soon as the question pop up, we get it. And I remember sometimes like me and Brendan would like answer at the same time, like, darn it, you got it in there first. So I mean, it is a good way, and there is an RSS feed to it, I believe, still, that you can sign up for. It's a good way to get that. Although I will say that I struggle sometimes now that we're getting into the .NET realm, that there not only are good ways of doing things in Kentico, but now there's so many different ways to do things just in general in .NET Core. So that's one area that I'm like, it really depends on what your company is doing for their actual .NET Core MVC structure, and so that's where sometimes it can be difficult, I think, nowadays in this new realm where there used to be 5 different ways to do it in Kentico. Now there's 5 different ways to do it in Kentico and 5 different ways to do it in .NET Core. Have you run into that as well, where like you see someone and they're doing something completely different, and like, well, it's not how we do it; it's a different flavor or whatnot.
Yeah, I think that kind of is true, because, like you say, like even in .NET Core, there's different ways of building stuff now. Like on the next slide, I'm gonna talk about like Sean's PVTC pattern and stuff like that. So there's obviously different ways of actually building Kentico websites, even in .NET Core now. So I think there's just a lot of variation. Yeah. But I guess
if you think about how much code we wrote for Portal Engine compared to how much code we write for Kentico Experience, is a big difference. As a Kentico developer 5 years ago, I spent a lot of my time clicking through repeaters, right, and filling out repeater forms and maybe coding up a little bit of transformations, but it was a lot of clicking in the UI. And so you needed to know, how do you do this thing in Kentico? Because the UI forced you down that path. That was the solution, was how do you customize through what the platform provides? But now you can do anything you want. You really just need Experience's APIs to retrieve data from the database. And there's still a lot of Kentico specific things for the content management side, but for the presentation side, sky's the limit, and your solutions are going to be all over the place.
I think the other thing I wanted to mention was the developer resources that I think the MVPs put up on the Kentico GitHub. There's a big list of blogs on there that I've clicked through all of them and had a look back at different blog posts that people have posted, and it's been useful. And obviously there's I don't think it's I think it's okay now. I think on the Kentico Experience MVP page on the website, it's got a link to all the blog pages, but I don't know if it's always been like that or not. But at least this is a central location. It's not just got the MVPs posts or blog listing pages in there. It's got other members of the community like myself as well, and also it's got like different agency websites listed in there as well, so you can see what the agencies themselves are pushing content out, and it's quite useful to just expand your knowledge in that regard as well. So you might not necessarily see all this on social media, but a central place for things is on that developer resources page. And I guess people can do pull requests and add new resources onto there as well if they find anything useful. So I think that would be a good thing to promote and get more people to add stuff onto there. I guess I don't know who has the final say what gets added into that onto the pull request though. Is that a Kentico experience?
Yeah, it's Kentico that approves the pull request, but if you have something to contribute, just open up a PR and it'll probably be added. Yeah.
Cool. And then I guess the last thing to mention on that is Kentico support. Obviously, they're the fallback. If everything all else fails, you've always got Kentico support that offers the supports, and you just submit a question on there, and they can give you an answer on that. So my blog highlights from basically this current year, I just wanted to go over because, obviously, since Kentico Experience 13, everyone's starting to use .NET Core, so there's quite a few new learnings in that regard. So first one is feature folders, that the pattern that has been described by Trevor on, I think it was on DevNet. That was on DevNet on the articles area. This really helped me set it up on my a website that I'd been doing for NetConstruct. It's great because it shows you how to keep all your models, views, and view components all together. He's got some good code examples on there, so you're not on your own just having to figure it all out. And I think feature folders in general are really good because new developers don't have to search all over the place, and even more experienced developers as well. All the files are all together. You don't have to go searching for controllers and views in different locations that typically used to happen in maybe Kentico 12 or something like that. So I think it's a good thing to implement on websites because it helps new developers especially get used to Kentico Experience. I think, especially for if you've got a widget and all their views and view components all together, it's just easier to work with, I think. So the next article I want to highlight is the page templates and view components by Sean. So the thing with this, I really like that it embraces Kentico's basic routing out of the box. Basic routing. It removes the need for controllers. So in my eyes, controllers only really should be used now for complex scenarios. If you've got some bespoke functionality that needs to happen in a controller, or you've got custom routing that you need to route specifically to that controller instead of just using the out-of-the-box routing. Or the main one that I would use it for is obviously like web API calls and exposing data in that regard. So I really love using both of these together on NetConstruct projects, and I think it just makes it easier for new developers to get started from to use Kentico Experience, because we don't always, when we take new people on, new developers, we don't require that they know Kentico Experience. They need some sort of .NET background, and they need to know stuff like that. So it's nice that they can go in and actually understand this without necessarily knowing Kentico Experience inside out. It's got familiar patterns and stuff that it just makes it easier to use. And the other article by Sean as well for the good startup hygiene. Over the years, I've worked on many projects that the startup file can just get quite large and it's hard to manage. Again, new developers and even more experienced developers will find it hard to manage once it gets over a certain size. So it's nice for, in Sean's examples, he's got extension methods in there that pull groups of groups of
functionality.
Yeah,
yep.
I can't remember the word, sorry. Pulls them together and groups them. So it's quite nice to be able to do that, and it makes it just easier for everyone to use. And if you follow that on every project that you do, everyone knows exactly which file to look into, if it's to do with routing or if it's to do with setting up Kentico or anything like that. So I guess in summary, the first thing I want to just say is just ask questions. I think is the biggest thing that helped me grow as a developer or a Kentico Experience developer. I think like at NetConstruct, I'd much prefer new people that started a company. I'd prefer that they ask questions and discuss things with me. I don't want them to just sit back and struggle all day. I'd rather they ask questions and discuss things with me. It's all about sharing knowledge and experience to become like a better developer in the end of the day. And I think it's a two-way thing. Like I like helping other people because it also helps me become better as well, I think. So I think that's the nicest thing to put for is to ask questions. And obviously I suppose it's a bit more difficult if you're not in a development team or an agency or something like that. But like I said on the previous slide, there's different platforms you can discuss on DevNet, or even Slack's probably a nice one if you just want like informal discussions about .NET or Kentico Experience in general. So I still think that's a good thing to do. Again, use documentation and the training resources. Like I said before, it's all good stuff to use. And over the 8 years, code reviewing also helps a lot. So at NetConstruct, all code is reviewed before it goes to the production website. And I find it a good way to not only to ensure standard of code is obviously good to go up to live, to production, but it's good to see if another developer's worked on a project. I get to learn new techniques and tools that I might not have used before, especially with .NET Core coming up and using the new Kentico Experience APIs, or there might be a new .NET tool that I haven't used before. If I look at code review and other people's code, when they are using new patterns or design patterns and things like that, I get to code review that and actually learn myself, and maybe potentially start using that on my projects as well. So I think with that, another good thing is, again, if you're not really in like a development team, you can check GitHub and go on the Kentico Experience open source projects, get yourself involved in there, look through all the repositories that we've looked at today, like Sean and DevTrev's, and you can maybe not necessarily code review them, but look through what code has been done and see if it helps you at all as well going forward. So I think that's pretty much the end of the slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Liam. And like I said, that we are all on our journey of growing, right? And thank you for kind of giving some, because honestly, like how we grew as MVPs, like way back when, is going to be different in some areas than how you grow now. And I thank you for doing this, because there are new people joining on. Like, where do I even start? How do I learn this new platform? All the different voices and things out there. And that's really great. What I'm going to do is I'll probably grab the links from your PowerPoint And then I will later update this video to have it in the description, all those different resources and links. And that way that's available. So yeah, and it's been great to have you also, like I said, as part of the community. You know, you're one of the people that all the MVPs pretty much recognize. You're always here on the Ask the Experts, and we always appreciate that as well. So, well, we are at the end of this, and it is 11:30 here, so we did a full hour and a half show. I just want to thank again all the MVPs, all the viewers out there. Thank you for watching and continue to watch this and find value. We'll probably be doing another one of these in like a month and a half, 2-ish. And then looking for another guest speaker. So if you'd like to be part of this, make sure to hit me up on that Slack channel. Check the video chat for my email and the Slack link. And you really can email pretty much any of the MVPs and we'll add you into the community Slack channel. But just thanks again, everyone, for the great discussion. And hope to see you next time. Take it easy, everyone.
Speak soon.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.